A very, very good afternoon to you here in the Excel Centre, and welcome to this lunchtime session on sustainable transport and cities. I'm Ben Folser. I'm a partner at KPMG in our transport practice. I've spent the last 20 years of my life in transport in various different guises, and I look after all of our work in sustainable and intelligent transport. And I'm joined here by some fantastic panelists who I'll introduce themselves actually in just a second. But I wanted to warm up with some context for today's session. So, the world's major cities are expected to be 25% have 25% more hot days or very hot days over 35 degrees centigrade than in the 1990s. And just where we are today here in London, we're warming at about 0.25 degrees per decade. So, and actually we had some Prue and I had a very interesting discussion earlier about warming, and even just within the different parts of London, different heat sinks, which we'll cover in a bit. As well as warming, we've got 8 billion people now living in cities and areas that are outside the World Health Organization recommended air quality limits. Now, obviously, all of this compounds into more dirty, more dangerous, more hotter cities. But steps are being taken. And, it's great to be able to do this event here in London, where actually we've made some material progress in addressing a lot of these things, and as have many other cities in the UK. This month, London introduced its 3,000th zero-emission bus, and actually is achieving 97% plus compliance in its ultra-low emission zone scheme, which is fantastic. Air quality has improved at 99% of sites being monitored since 2019. And what King's College anticipated would take 193 years to bring our air quality down to legal limits in London has taken just 8, because some of the most fantastic sort of and passionate and driven action in the city. And what that translates to is NO2 emissions are down by 27% and particulate matters down by 31%. And this has all been driven by a whole range of interventions, not just a single thing, but a package of things that have enabled us to really focus on sustainability and active transport. The cycle lane kilometres in London went up from 90 kilometres in 2016 to a staggering 431 kilometres now, which has resulted in a 43% increase in cycling journeys. Now, this isn't without its challenges. Bus speeds in London average only 8 miles an hour, and bus patronage is stubbornly below pre-COVID levels, only about 84 to 85% of pre-COVID levels, which has a knock-on impact, obviously, in terms of attractiveness to bus, but also the cost of running these things requiring significant subsidy. And actually, I think last year, TfL broke the £1 billion a year subsidy barrier for buses, which puts in perspective of how important it is for the whole system to work. Low traffic neighbourhoods have had mixed feedback. Most residents don't actually know in a recent survey, 2024, whether they've actually had a benefit, although support is generally more positive than negative for them. And the 20 mile an hour limit that you've seen happen across the most streets in here and obviously in Wales as well has had mixed results. TfL reports a 40% reduction in fatalities and astonishingly a 75% reduction in child deaths. And Living Streets reported that over 70% of people are fans of 20 mile an hour zones, especially people who actually live on those roads. And I'm one of those people in South London. But another more significant and well-researched study found that there was actually very limited data to support those claims. So a bit of a mixed message there. But radical solutions can work. And Pontevedra in Spain is often cited as a really good example of this, where they reduced traffic by 70%, removing it from the centre of the town and moving it all to the outskirts. That's resulted, since it's happened, in 0 fatalities from traffic, a 70% reduction in carbon, and economic growth in a region that was otherwise actually facing economic decline. So 12,000 more people and businesses have moved into Pontevedra. So it shows that there are opportunities here to make substantial difference, but sometimes you have to be brave. Now, today, with this great panel, we're going to be discussing how sustainable transport can drive urban regeneration while making our cities greener and healthier. And I'm delighted to be joined by the panel covering urban regeneration, transport operations, and inward investment and export opportunities, providing some rich insights in this area. So that's Peter here, Head of Urban Futures, the Oscorp Development Company, Proof, Head of Growth Innovation at London and Partners, and Graham, Head of Sustainability at Southeastern. And I'm going to now turn to each of them and ask just for a quick introduction, bit of context about your role and what you're doing. And then we're going to go into a set of questions, but I'm obviously very keen to take questions as well from the audience. So we've got a few things that we're going to discuss, and then we'll open up to the floor.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. Peter Runacres, Head of Urban Futures, an amazing grand title, and I love it. The purpose behind my job is to make sure that this 44-acre site, Zone 1 and Zone 2 in central London, is future-proofed. And one of the key components of that is making it net zero. We've had a highly sustainable development program from day one, and we have been tying into the local, very highly connected network of transport systems that we've got in and around us. But really, it's how we can actually layer on all of those integrated sustainable systems to create that truly sustainable exemplar of urban development, and actually getting people to and from it and supporting businesses with sustainable transport is absolutely critical to us. And I'll come on to that, how we've done that a little bit more later.
Hello, can you hear me? Yes. I'm Prue Ashby, Head of Green Innovation at London and Partners. London and Partners is the growth agency for London. Our goal is to create economic growth that is resilient, sustainable, and inclusive. And that growth comes from attracting visitors, bidding to bring major conferences, sporting events, cultural events into London, attracting businesses from around the world who are on their globalization journey, helping them set up in London, helping London businesses grow. We also work with high street businesses on their growth. We've got a part of the business now which is supporting manufacturing businesses in London in digitizing. And we are going to be helping small businesses with their AI implementation as well. And we also work with corporates on their innovation strategies. So we do a lot. But my particular role is Head of Green Innovation. I lead the team on delivering for the Mayor on inward investment targets around green innovation. So that's companies from around the world that are in transportation and mobility, energy, prop tech, built environment infrastructure, circular economy, smart cities, food tech, and so on. And our first role is to sell London because they could actually expand anywhere in the world. And then secondly, we streamline the process of them setting up in London, creating jobs and contributing to the ecosystem. We also have an important role related to the London Growth Plan, which is a 10-year plan where it's a year old, so we've got 9 years to go. And the London Growth Plan is to turbocharge the London economy by 107 billion and create 150,000 jobs. And my role there is to create the green innovation strategy. We want London to be the green innovation capital of the world by 2030. And we want to make that happen. So strategizing and implementing that is an important part of my role as well.
Yeah, hello everybody. I'm Graham Mollison. I'm from Southeastern Trains. We're the train operator connecting thousands of communities, people across Kent in East Sussex. So we bring about 500,000 people into London every day. We've got 1,700 trains that connect those people into London, and we have 5,000 people who work with us. So our footprint is really large. Our role is really important. It connects through 165 stations across that region. So our business is really about people. It's about the customers that we carry every day, the customers that we take to work, we bring to opportunity, whether that's work, education, it might be through to healthcare or through social activities as well. We've got a large supply chain. We've got thousands of community around, not thousands, a lot of communities around the network that we also support. and we have the 5,000 people who work with us. So really, we're very much a people-focused opportunity, connecting people with opportunity. And our reason for being really is about helping to drive economic growth, increasing jobs and supporting housing growth. So we're one of the first businesses to integrate under Great British Railways. So we've connected with Network Rail to create an integrated business unit that's very customer focused, driving change across our network. And we're the only, we have all electric trains, so our trains don't have any tailpipe emissions. So there's a great opportunity for us to show low carbon transport as well.
Brilliant. Thank you very, very much. I think we're going to have to ask you to hold your mics a bit closer to your mouths if possible. Just there's quite a lot of noise in here. I'm seeing people in the audience. But I think it's a great start. And look, what a great panel to be discussing this with. We had a quick parlay before we got here and talked about what do we want to discuss? What are some of the areas that might be useful for you as well? And I think a good starting point is actually asking, what do we mean by resilience in the context of cities and transport? So obviously there are a whole range of different facets here, whether that be climate resilience, resilience to demand, changing demographics, changing technologies. I suppose, can I start actually with Graham on this one? Because I think it's, for you, you're bringing in, as I said, tens of hundreds of thousands of people into the city every day. What does resilience mean for you?
I think resilience is about providing reliable services to the people who need us every single day. So we experienced that during COVID. So during COVID, we were still running services for essential workers coming into London, people who work in hospitals, in the police, the fire services, those people who can't work from home, who still need to come into the city. So for us, a resilience service is one where communities and customers can rely on us to provide a service, regardless of the weather, regardless of the conditions, to get them into work. So for us, that's about, things do happen. We do get impacted by weather, but it's about a strong bounce back, providing service recovery really quickly. So what we want is that people can trust travelling with us, and they can locate out of London, but still know they can get into London to their job. So we've been doing quite a lot of work, working across our system. So working with our partner organisations, Network Rail, to build long-term strategies and plans that help us both respond to short-term weather conditions and also build towards a long-term climate resilient future as well.
And just a sort of a follow-up question that you and I were discussing just before the panel, Graham, about adaptation pathways and the fact we don't have a single sort of, we're going to get there and we're here and there's one straight line to get there. How is that being factored in?
So what we're realising is that it's quite hard to look ahead to 2050. It's quite hard to take the business who probably maybe looks over a 2 or 3 year window to take them forward to 2050 and also have the crystal ball to know exactly how weather and climate's going to impact our trains. We know that we've got a long coastline. Some of our infrastructure between Dover and Folkestone has already had issues with seawall collapse. So we know we're quite vulnerable to future climate impacts. So over the summer, we've been working with Network Rail, who've been doing a piece of work called Adaptation Pathways. And it's basically looking to see how we create a pathway to a resilient infrastructure, resilient services, with different points in that future where we might change that pathway as different things happen. I mean, we're doing that with the Environment Agency and local authorities as well. So we know that if the seawalls collapse in North Kent on the Thames Estuary, the next line of defence for communities is our railway embankment. But our railway embankment may well be very vulnerable if the seawalls collapse. So it's kind of coming together as a collective organisations to see how we can support each other to get funding and provide resilience locally, but also to see how we might need to change that pathway in future as maybe sea level rises quicker or it gets hotter or wetter. So it's kind of having a long-term strategy, but that strategy is flexible.
Thank you. And Prue, obviously, to 107 billion growth, 103, that obviously huge. That's going to require significant investment. It's going to require a fundamental sort of upskilling of people. What does resilience mean for you in terms of the context of enabling that to happen and making sure that it's sort of future-proofed?
Yeah, so resilience for us is about ensuring that we can get that growth and ensuring that all the pieces are in place to support that. The London Climate Resilience Review, which was released a couple of years ago now, that made it was a world-leading review, and it made 50 recommendations, 25 for the mayor, 25 were for national government and other stakeholders. But fundamentally, the key points about it were looking at integrating resilience into all decisions about a city, proactive preparedness, nature-based solutions, upgrading building and utility standards, and inclusive action. So making sure everyone comes along on that journey. And I'll just pick up on the nature-based solutions, and that's sustainable drainage and things like that. But there's a really interesting and quite nice example of in Greenford that had been flooding very, very regularly. And they brought in a family of beavers. And since they brought in that family of beavers, there's been no flooding at that particular point. So bringing in nature and I suppose animals and other parts of nature to solve these problems is one thing. Secondly, on sort of upgrading buildings, we were just talking to Westminster Borough Council, and they have now a retrofit first planning policy that is on their website and has been approved. So that is about not just knocking things down, but actually looking at how we can make buildings more long-term and resilient by retrofitting them and adapting them and looking at all those possibilities first. So I think those are a couple of great examples. And then the third thing I would say is that my company is about attracting innovation. It's about what is the innovation around the world that we can bring into London and improve what London's doing, and vice versa. What is the innovation we have from London that we can export to other cities so that we can all be resilient in the future as cities?
Great, thank you. And I'm going to turn to Peter, and I'm going to sort of broaden out the question a little bit, Peter, because obviously at a hyper-local level in the Earls Court development, you've got to think about the long-term sustainability, resilience of that. And we're also seeing a lot more effort and focus on placemaking as a concept. So how do the two come together? How do you use placemaking to encourage people to come to want to work and live in Earls Court development, and also create that long-term resilience?
It's a really good challenge, actually. And one of the lovely things is that, ironically, sustainable transport and the last few miles, is critical to enabling us to create places that people want to come and stay that are resilient. So we're lucky in that the site is surrounded by 3 tube stations. It's got a mainline railway. It's got Mildmay running right the way through it. So we've got West Brompton, West Ken, and Earls Court right by us. So we're really well connected. But then it's actually, how do you get people in and around that site in a safe and sustainable way? And so we've designed the scheme to be 85% car free. We're trying to make sure that we've only got 225 car parking spaces on the whole of the development's 44-acre site. And 200 of those are Blue Badge car parking spaces, and the other 25 are an all-electric carpool. Why have we done that? Well, to enable that placemaking, all of the the real purpose behind places actually happens in the spaces between the buildings. And that's really, really important. So if you can keep the vehicles away and out of that, whilst making it, to quote Hammersmith and Fulham, ruthlessly inclusive, then you have a greater opportunity of actually creating really rich spaces. And to Prue's point about having nature-based solutions, all of those routes, if we can make them, because they don't have to be so vehicular dominated, then we can actually plant them more heavily. We can make sure that they are resilient for the temperature increases that we're only going to get more and more. If I may expand a little bit, just before this, I came from a talk at a round table at UBS with a bunch of financiers and insurers about this. And in Miami, the flood risk is so great there that their insurance premiums within a couple of years on your home will be greater than your mortgage payments. They had a gentleman from the rail infrastructure who said that basically the biggest risk from climate change from our infrastructure, apart from the heat, is actually the flooding and the prevention of us being able to use our transport infrastructure. So, for example, the west coastline being washed out regularly, fire and smoke impacting on highways agency, roads, etc. So the more you can actually do to bring in nature-based solutions to that is helping mitigate it. So the lovely story of the beavers is fantastic. But again, working with partners, and we're doing the same at Earls Court, we're utilising nature-based solutions to make sure that we retain all of the water that falls onto the site and the greywater in the repurpose and reuse of our site to make sure that the greening lasts, so that we know that by 2040 to 2050, we will be a few degrees cooler than all of the areas around us, which is fundamental. That is driven partly by looking at our transport strategy in and around that last mile.
Incredibly timely, because it's all touched on things we've already actually just before this panel were talking about. So we were talking about the difference in temperature variation in different parts of London. We were sworn to secrecy on what the actual numbers were, weren't we, Prue? But there was some quite differences in heavily concreted areas versus greener areas in London. We were also talking about the role of insurance and actually where in the value chain, what's pushing us towards resilience and investment in making things resilient? Is it the actual authorities, is it the contractors, or is it actually higher up the chain where we're thinking, well, I've got a long-term interest in this? And there's another interesting case study from New York that after the flooding at the metro, the subway, it was 9 years ago, the height of flooding, the MTA went to go and get a renew its insurance for all of the damage that was done, and they said the insurance company wouldn't touch it. They said no, absolutely not until you've prepared to invest in doing something. And so they came up with an incredibly innovative insurance bond, a resilience bond, which effectively the cost of the bond coverage reduces as MTA makes the asset more resilient, and it's actually measured, weirdly, in feet of water. So if you move all your cables and all the signaling cables and power cables up to the wall of the subway rather than putting it on the floor, it's going to be more resilient to flooding. So it's incentivized them to drive increasing resilience because of the cost of the long-term insurance, and then, of course, the whole cost of the asset as well. Conscious we've got a finite amount of time. This is a conversation I'm sure we could do for hours. I'd just like to turn, actually, if it's okay, to Graham. So building on what Peter was saying, your place-based schemes, obviously there's quite a lot of interest in transit-oriented development and how we really drive sort of sustainability of transport through TOD. It'd be interesting to hear what South East is doing in that space.
So the really interesting ones, when you look at London Bridge Station, that's operated by Network Rail, the regeneration, thank you, is based on railway tunnels and arches that are 200 years old. They date back to the first original railway. And then that railway station has been reimagined. It's regenerated the whole part of London. You only need to walk around London Bridge now, and it's completely transformed the area. So I guess that's on the really big scale. And also we run UK's only high-speed rail services at the moment, and that's transformed the communities around the coastal areas of Kent, Folkestone and Margate and Ramsgate. If you're living in Folkestone, you can get into King's Cross and Pancras in 1 hour, which before would have been much longer. So it's opened up access to communities. But then on a more micro scale, we give a small grant fund to station teams, give them agency to create their own station gardens. They do those station gardens often with community groups. So we've given them agency to bring in biodiversity, make those stations friendly to passengers, and also part of the community. So I think we can see things on a really macro scale, but actually sometimes it's the small schemes that we do that really have an impact on the local communities and the teams that work there as well.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to an interesting topic, I think probably on a few people's lips, given the announcements of what might be seeing in London later this year. And I'm going to start with Prue on this one, but the AVs are coming. We're going to get automated vehicles on the streets of London probably by the end of this year. I'd be interesting to understand are they going to contribute to or detract from sustainable transport? Will they support growth plans in London? Welcome views from the panel on this one.
So, well, firstly, in terms of the innovation, it's definitely coming. I'm sure some of you in the audience have seen the Waymo vehicles mapping out their routes. What is interesting is, and we've been working with Waymo in their expansion from California into the UK, the London company Wave is actually seen as the leader in Europe for what they do in autonomous vehicles, and they use a different methodology to Waymo. So Waymo does the mapping of the routes, whereas Wave actually does end-to-end, has an end-to-end deep learning framework, so it doesn't need to do the mapping in the same way. And it's definitely leading in that. They've just raised in February $1.2 billion. Dollars, and it really is pioneering. They've got backers like Nvidia and Microsoft and so on. So Wave is a really amazing London company and one to watch. In terms of implementation, the Mayor's office are really focused on their transport strategy, which is about Vision Zero safety, so 0 deaths and serious accidents on the roads by 2041, and also 80% of journeys to be active travel or public transport by 2041 as well. Now, apparently we're at about 65% at the moment, but it's always the last 10-15%, which is the hardest to do. But so how does AVs fit into that? Well, that is it's the careful adoption. It's the thinking about the existing taxi drivers and the impact on them. And they must outperform humans in terms of safety as well. So there's lots of factors to consider. But I think something like, and this is maybe even further in the future, autonomous buses. At the moment, bus companies struggle to recruit drivers. It's just something that they struggle to recruit people to do those roles. So maybe that's a case for where autonomy fulfills a need. But yeah, so AVs is definitely a very interesting area, and London is a great city where companies are looking at coming here and taking that up.
And Peter, I guess from an Earls Court perspective, very interesting in how they fit into your wider sustainable transport ecosystem.
Absolutely. There's a huge amount of advantages in having them. So, and it doesn't have to be cars. It can be smaller vehicles that can be AV. So that gives you the opportunity of actually freeing up more of your spaces between the buildings for other purposes, be it landscaping or retail or whatever, or play, etc. So it's a fantastic opportunity. So that we're kind of pre-planning for that in a way, in that we're not planning for traditional road systems through our site, but the ability to be able to take vehicles through. I did a study. I was involved in a study in a previous existence when I was working on the King's Cross Regeneration Scheme, and we looked at the potential impact of AV in Camden and in the areas around. And what you can do if you think of your typical street in London, and you think of how much of that roadway is actually taken up by parked vehicles that are not used more than 80% of the time. Now, if people converted to AVs and you actually have that ability to just have those sustainable transport modes, taking you from A to B without the need for your own place in the car, the vehicle, whatever it is, would go away, park itself, or be in consistent use until it needs charging. can you imagine how much space is going to be freed up for landscaping, for suds, for alternative uses? What is going to be the impact on the climate resilience of the city? You're taking away all of those hard surfaces, replacing it with materials and other functions that would actually reduce the urban heat island effect. I don't think we've even scratched the surface of looking at how beneficial this could actually be, not just looking at it from a transport mode, please forgive me, train people, but from the wider benefits, those multiple layers that we haven't even started to account for.
Brilliant. And actually, that's a good segue, isn't it, Graham? Because I suppose threat or competition for the rail system, it's a question that's on most people's minds. If you're making it significantly cheaper to travel by single occupancy vehicle, gets you from origin to destination without the interchange penalty, how does rail compete with that?
I think it's always going to be a place because people want to make fast, long-term travel. They want to be assured about the time. Most of the time, our trains are running on time, between 3 minutes of departure and arrival time. So I think people want that assurance that they can do that. But I think there's a place for AVs in helping that end-to-end journey, that first last mile. How do we help communities that are maybe very rural communities? How can they connect to our train services? And how do you make that last mile connection? And I think as we start to see demographic changes, people get older and mobility needs change, I think that the AVs may well help people connect better with our services, because people who may not be able to access other transport at the start and end of the journey. So I think there's a place to see this as a system and to create a more efficient transport system as a result.
Brilliant, thank you. I've got a couple more questions we'd sort of talked about before the panel, but I'm conscious that I want to give people the opportunity in the audience to ask questions if they'd like to, given the fantastic panel we've got here. So are there any questions from the audience for the panel? Yep, lady at the front here, please. If we've got a mic, or I can throw my mic at you. Hang on 1 second.
Yes, thank you. Hi, everyone. This is a rather personal question, but it is something that I think about when it comes to systemically the sustainability of transport and travel, especially thinking about cities that have public transport like trams and metros and things like that. I'm thinking about what is London, and I don't live in London. I live in France currently, and I've lived in New York previously. Big public transport user. But I'm wondering, what are you doing in London to make public transport more appetizing? And I'm talking about when a individual thinks about, oh, it's going to be hot, there's going to be no AC, it's going to be crowded, there's not going to be like trains at the times that I need it. Oh, I'm with my kids, or like we need accessibility. And so when a individual is making that decision of, oh, do I just hop in an Uber, which is not good for sustainability? Do I just hop in an Uber, or do I go in the hot subway with my 2 kids with the broken escalator and the blah, blah, blah? And I'm wondering if that part of the psychology of the user and the palatability, how appetizing using public transport, how much of that is being thought about in the design of these solutions for the future of sustainable transport and travel?
That's a great question. So proving great.
Yeah, I can touch on that. So firstly, just if you do get an Uber in London, it's very, very likely to be electric. Uber has more electric drivers on their platform in London than any other city in the world. So that's the first thing. But aside from that, the focus on public transport, the new infrastructure that's been built, like the Elizabeth line that you may have been on to come here today, all air conditioned, absolutely incredible, high speed, etc. It's enabled more than 1 million people, I think, extra to travel into the city. But I think you've got a really valid point about public transport. And 2 things I would add to that. Firstly is this sort of look at multimodal. So now the Uber app here, you can book a train and your Uber and your bus and your delivery and your boat, because there's Uber Clippers that run up the Thames as well. You can do all that. You can book a e-bike as well, actually, so a 2-wheeler. So the benefit of like these sort of multimodal 1-point systems where you can book everything. And then secondly, the development of the technology. So London and Partners, we have a stand here today, and it stands out because it's a big red bus out there. It's the latest BYD electric bus. There's 3,000 electric buses now in London. There's actually 20 hydrogen buses as well that do the long routes. That brand new BYD bus, if you want to go and have a look at it, has air conditioning, it has charging points, it has all the sort of latest that you want. So exactly, making it as comfortable and pleasurable as possible and easy as possible to navigate, I think, is all those things.
Yeah, so I guess from an operator's perspective, we've, over the last few years, all of our trains, or most of our trains, now have accessible toilets on them. We're investing in accessible stations, so it's the biggest scheme in the country at Hither Green, with lifts accessing the platforms there. So there's our investment in building the infrastructure and our trains to help people feel confident to travel. We've also got an accessibility panel. So an accessibility panel comes to our business to advise us on how we can improve services for everybody. And we now, customers can call up and ask for service. So if they need a ramp to access a train or they need assistance to use our services, they can call in advance. We can meet them there and we can help them onto the service. So I think we're trying to do as much as we can to make the services accessible to everybody, whether that's in improving the infrastructure or in the services that we provide.
Just from a development perspective, we're trying to make the development as digitally connected as possible. So as Prue's highlighted, I think as schemes come forward more and as the systems become more integrated, there's a lot of talk about AI at the moment, but one of the simple things you can do is actually use your AI of preference, there are more than one, to just try and link in all of those transport systems so you could put in your choices and then work out where you want to go. And actually, if developments like ours actually set out what is available to that and make that freely available, which we will do, then that means that you can actually plan those last miles with the kind of constraints that you actually want. But you kind of hope that as things come forward more, they become more and more ruthlessly inclusive so that you don't have to have all of those concerns that you quite rightly highlighted.
And I'll just wrap up by bringing hopefully some. The panel's been very optimistic, and I think that's really great because actually there's a lot to be optimistic about in this space. We've not always done things particularly well. Journey planning without knowing whether the escalators or lifts are working, not great. That needs to be fixed. Trains leaving just before the buses turned up, not great. That needs to be fixed. Buses with very rattly windows and no air conditioning, especially in this heat, not great. That needs to be fixed. But we are getting there. And actually, there's a lot of focus on this. The Department for Transport launched Better Connected a couple of months ago, which is the name of the Integrated National Transport Strategy. And it has a lot of big ambitions in there, including mobilising the Transport Data Action Plan, which actually, Peter, you were just discussing. How do we make those data points available so we can do integrated transport planning, and as Prue was also saying as well, integrated journey planning, but also getting people collaborating better. There's a project called Mini Switzerland. So Thomas Abelman, people have seen him, very passionate speaker in the transport space, talking about how do you actually make sure that we join up these sort of schedules and transport modes. How do we give opportunities for private sector to invest, but actually still the same seamless customer experience on the front end, whilst having multiple private sector providers? This is all possible, but it requires concerted effort in standards, in thinking about that overall end-to-end customer proposition. Great British Railways should be doing that with rail. And we've got the transport devolution with rail reform and bus market reform, which is giving cities outside of London the TfL type experience to be able to integrate those services and provide a wholly inclusive network. So I think there's a lot to be optimistic about in the UK. There are still some stumbling blocks, I think. We need to make sure that GBR works with the local mayoral authorities, and we need to make sure that National Highways works with the local mayoral authorities, so we don't just have islands and bridges, but the actual islands are connected to the bridges. We're still going. We've got another 10 minutes. So, are there any other questions from the audience? Don't be shy. Okay. In which case, I'll go to my. Yeah, you can bring the mic back up. Thank you. Go to my next question, which is actually probably quite well linked to this, which is around systems thinking. So we talked a lot about there being a lot of actors in this space, whether that be the authorities, tech providers, insurance providers, or operators themselves, the customers. How do we get systems thinking into this, and how can that actually improve sustainability? And Prue, you had some thoughts on this, I think, as well.
Yeah, I mean, we need to think about how we develop our cities and bring in innovation that actually improves. It looks across everything, not just solving one specific problem. What if we solve one problem? What's going to be the impact on the other areas? So we work with innovation companies, climate tech businesses. In London, raised 2.1 billion last year. That was the third biggest amount in the world. 150 deals, which was actually the most number of deals. So we've got the innovation, we've got the VCs, we've got the investment here. What we need to do is bring it together with the pain points and challenges in a overarching view. And that is what London Growth Plan is looking at, really. It's ensuring that we bring in the financing and funding for the right projects, bring in the right innovations, support the right innovations in their growth, and also, connecting the right people with the challenges and using, say, government. What are their procurement channels? What can they provide test beds for these solutions so that they can be trialed in real life situations? So bringing together, as I say, the funding, the innovation, and the sort of overarching kind of strategy for the city to solve these challenges.
Thank you. Graham, we were talking before the panel about collaboration and how no organisation is an island. And actually what you found with Southeastern is collaborating more with other parties has enabled you to achieve more. I wonder if you could talk about that a bit.
Yes, I often think when people talk about innovation, they talk about buying things or technology. And I think there's a whole load of innovation that comes from us connecting with the people who are part of our ecosystem, the people who help our businesses to work and to thrive. So we've done some really interesting work about trying to help ourselves become more weather and climate resilient. And we had an interdependency workshop, and we had the other people in our system that can help us create that resilient operators system in the future. Now, you think that'd be really obvious. Why wouldn't we do that? But we hadn't done it before. So having people like Network Rail, having some local authorities, having other people in the room who are dependent on us and we're dependent on them, to really find pathways through to create more resilient systems in the future. So I think we need to think about investing in our relationships with other organisations that can help us build that resilience. And I'll give you an example. There's a small station, a lovely part of East Sussex called Rye, a lovely resilient station. It's on an embankment. The station's high up from the flood waters. But if the area floods, no one can actually get to our station because all the roads are flooded. So we have a really resilient railway system, but no one can use it. So it's about how do we work with the local authority and other people to create a fully resilient community. So I think it's about thinking about how do we work together to create change.
Brilliant. And of course, Pizza, for an Earls Court development company, you're right in the heart of a system of systems. How are you approaching systems thinking in the development structure?
It's absolutely fundamental. But most people miss the trick in that when you're multi-layering systems, you're not looking at the co-benefits or how one might benefit another. So, for example, we're putting in a district network, and we will have energy storage capacity within that network. So why can't we tie that in with our localized transport node network? So so we can actually use excess energy from either the buildings or from our district network to actually store and save to enable it to use those last mile trips so that we can actually charge up your scooters, your electric prams, or whatever it is that we're going to be using in the future. So how you've got to think of those co-benefits, and that has, and it's also then what can you do to widen that to show the bigger benefits of that in terms of freeing up the space. If we've got those systems integrated around the site, then does that free up more public space in other areas where it's actually needed for other things, rather than just racks and racks and racks of last mobile e-bikes or e-scooters, etc. So it's not just looking at the risks that you've got, it's actually looking at the wider benefits. So how, for example, can we integrate our sustainable urban drainage systems with our water systems, with our public realm? Systems thinking is absolutely fundamental. And to Graham's point, DEFRA is doing some, I only found out this morning, they're doing some amazing work with linking all of those stakeholders together to work with farmers, to work with individual landowners to help prevent flooding or fire risk to our rail and road infrastructure. And they've got the insurers involved. And as I was saying earlier, that whole point is going to come to this country soon. Flood risk and fire risk is going to increase dramatically. But if you've got a peat bog that isn't going to catch fire in the summer months because it's actually used as a soakaway for the roads and rail around it, then actually you're getting multiple benefits from those. We're only just starting to think of those systems. And if you can prove that to the insurers, back to your earlier point, way, way, way back, who is at the top of the food chain? It is the funders and it is the insurers. So you've actually got to tick their boxes before you do anybody else's. And that's where system thinking really comes into its own.
Brilliant, thank you. We have 5 minutes left, so I will ask my last question. So later, okay, let me come down with the microphone.
Good morning, or I think it's afternoon now. I just wanted to ask questions around. I was hearing the lady Ashby speak as I came onto the stage, and you were talking about the BYD bus. Right. So I landed in London about 2 days ago for Climate Week. And I thought I was going to see a lot more prevalence of EV adoption. So I was curious, what's the City of London or just the United Kingdom doing about increasing EV adoption, right? Citywide or even just countrywide? And are there specific mechanisms that you're putting in place in order to make it ease the adoption, that is, and movement from ICE and EVs to EV vehicles? So that's on the one hand. On the second hand is the government actually either creating incentives of sorts, right? Are we actually seeing a levelized cost that is helping to reduce transportation, right, cost, whether it's at the passenger vehicle level or at commercial vehicle level? The reason I asked this, and maybe thirdly, I thought I would see more charging stations, right, in the city, meaning exclusively for EVs, whether again it's passenger or commercial or what have you, right? And I think the reason I asked this is because as a country, so I sit on the board of my nation's sovereign wealth fund. And I was curious to see how we could collaborate with the City of London or the United Kingdom, right? As we write our policies, right, for, again, reducing the transportation costs in Africa, where you find higher transportation cost by virtue of the fact that, whether it's geopolitical, right, or just the cost of fueling, period, right? And you're finding, and I think the real debate is whether or not EV is the way to go to help drive down the cost of transportation across board, across transportation, period. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that question. I was at the Octopus Energy Tech Summit. Feels like ages ago, but it was actually yesterday. And there was a lady there the Minister for Climate, who said that there's more EV charging points in the UK than petrol pumps now. So there is a lot more adoption of the EV charging points. There's 21,000 in London charging points. There's also recently announced a new rapid charging facility just near Heathrow Airport, which was announced literally a couple of weeks ago, which literally takes a few minutes, I think. to charge. So there's definitely a big focus on EVs. Octopus Energy, electric vehicles, they were doing a big promotion on how to buy an EV. The Chinese brands that are coming in are pretty good prices. They're also looking at stimulating the second-hand EV market as well, because you talked about the actual purchase of the vehicles. And so we're definitely going on the electrification track in terms of vehicles. In terms of heavy transportation, there was also a deal announced yesterday between Octopus Energy and CATL, which is a massive Chinese companies of the really big batteries for big trucks. So that's really interesting as well. So, and as I touched on with the lady asked the question earlier, you may not have been here for that. There's more EV drivers on Uber's platform in London than anywhere else in the world. And actually, a few years ago, what they found was the challenge that you said was there weren't enough charging points. And there were lots of charging points in places like Westminster in London, but it wasn't where the EV drivers actually lived. And so Uber actually created a fund by scraping off some money from each person's ride and actually funded the installation of charging points in 3 boroughs, Newham, Redbridge and one other. And that's made an improvement as well. So I think we're definitely on that journey, and it's the way we're going to go. And actually, the other thing about load balancing as well, just to touch on that, more people that have EVs, the more easy it will be to manage the loading on our electricity grid. And things like that.
Great, thank you. We're out of time, so I'm going to ask Peter just for a final comment on that, and then we'll wrap up. I think
from a governmental perspective, you'll find that most planning authorities in this country, you'll get much more support if you are fossil fuel free. And Prue's point about energy balancing is fundamental. It's the only way that you'll be able to do that with your energy. You won't be able to do it with any other system. So, you can use every EV as that's one of the things that we're using to balance our energy system and our district network, all electric. It's a no-brainer.
And I'll just wrap up as someone who's advised on policy, planning, finance and delivery of EV charging schemes. It's a portfolio. It's a balanced approach of planning, grants for the vehicles, grants for the infrastructure, policy decisions, the support that you're providing in terms of the softer push factors, education to people as well. And actually, ultimately in the UK, up to about 7 tons now, the total cost of ownership is cheaper with an electric vehicle for the vast majority of use cases than it is for a diesel vehicle. So you are seeing a fundamental shift happening now at quite a pace, especially in the commercial market. Very happy to talk about that afterwards. We have run out of time, with apologies. I'm sorry. We'll catch you afterwards. But can you please put your hands together for my fantastic panel of Peter, Prue and Graham? Thank you.